Welcome to the second day of the regional seminar on equality. Thank you for all who have connected via Zoom and those following through social media. Right now, we want to tell you that we have simultaneous interpretation in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. If you need it, please select the language by clicking on the globe icon at the bottom of your screen. Both participants can send their questions through the chat. This seminar is part of the TENER or HAVE initiative for equal democratic participation for women in Latin America between ID International, UNDP, and ONU Women. This is an alliance that started in 2015 to strengthen the political rights of women in the region. And through them, we have developed a political parity index, a mechanism for analysis, communication, and action that has been implemented and we are losing, it'll be, okay, in the network of paritary democracy. And since 2020, we have the regional platform for the training of women who are active in policy, together with Flaxo Argentina. Regarding equality, governance, inclusion, and to achieve the SDGs for the 2030 agenda, this IDEA Alliance is organizing this seminar to have a deep reflection on the current socio-political context in Latin America. We are to identify ways to strengthen democracy with greater representativity, accountability, citizens' participation in the public and private policies, to increase trust in public institutions towards sustainable development. We welcome you to this first panel that we're starting now, saying towards to inclusive and equal representation of paritary democracies. And this is going to be moderated by Maria Noel Baeza from ONU Women and UN Women, sorry. And we have participants. We also have Epsi Campbell, Vice President of Costa Rica, economist. She has also been representative for 2 periods. And as Vice President, she's in charge of the National Plan for the Economic Empowerment and Leadership of Women and follows also commitments regarding Afro-descendants of people. We also have from the Electoral Institute of Mexico, a professor of the School of Law of the UNAM, and also Marlene Macario Itzmat of the Platform of Indigenous Women of Guatemala. Unfortunately, she has had issues connecting and she's trying to reconnect and will let us know as soon as she can. And she is expert in pedagogy in the Institute of Creativity and Innovation of Entrepreneur Women. And she has co-founded many Quiche women's associations. Also, César Guevara Macifuen, Regional Governor of Cajamarca in Peru, business administrator, has also been representative in Congress in his country and has national and international experiences in generation of cooperation and marketing in international companies. For a more dynamic roundtable, the methodology we are going to use is a dialogue with Noel asking questions to the panelists who will have 4 minutes to answer in the first round of discussion. Then we will continue with a second intervention of 4 minutes each. And I'm going to leave you with Noel. Thank you, Pilar. Welcome all. And I would like to welcome Epsi Campbell, Lorenzo Cordova from the National Electoral Institute of Mexico, who's always accompanying us with our initiatives. Of course, Ms. Campbell as well, on how to improve democracy through greater participation, especially women, and Messias Guevara, Governor of Cajamarca, and Marlene from Guatemala, who I hope she can connect soon. It's a pleasure for all the people here at IDEA to have your presence, and we really thank everybody at Atenea for your participation. And to start this seminar, yesterday we had and so there are represented, and that governance and parity can open democracy and greater perspectives for the development of our society, especially with the participation of all. And we have 3 arguments for parity. First, it would be democratic justice. Women are 50% of the population, and we need and have the obligation and responsibility of participating on equal footing. Parity participation will strengthen participation, representativity, and opportunities for the interests and needs of women to be taken into account in all their diversity, because women are very diverse. We are Afro-descendants, indigenous peoples, different sexual orientations or abilities. We have to take into account all the diversity of women. Second is the potential for substantive equality. Now you're a role model, Epsi, for example, because a girl can say, now I can be in politics a vice president, and this is progress. And you can see then this qualitative leap because you have a role model who already made it. And third, for the transformative effects in the culture. Remember, you have stereotypes which can generate discrimination, but you can break them and generate new roles, new models with multiplication effects in all aspects of life. This panel wants to start discussing them and go beyond, because the concept of parity democracy aims not only as a parity in sharing power, but in all spheres of decision making at all levels. This is a very ambitious project to have parity as a principle of democracy, as a principle of representation, including territorial representation. We are half the population. We should be able to decide on the future of our families, economies, societies. To consolidate parity democracy will require a cultural shift, placing equality at the center in the state, institutions, and the lives of the citizens. And we're not talking about just formal recognition of equality or parity to generate the conditions and guarantees that allows us to exercise this parity. Of course, we need, for example, also co or shared responsibility, also in housework or caring for family members. I think that the care models should be a basic ingredient of achieving this parities and allow women to go out to work. And when we're talking about public policy, This has to reflect diversity. Some experiences to highlight is Costa Rica's experience, who has bet on parity in the executive and legislative spheres. And the pandemic response has placed women at the center. The experience of Mexico with parity, to have parity in the different powers or branches of the state, and specific measures to guarantee inclusion of women, migrant women, Afro-descendants, indigenous women, etc. And Peru's experience that during the pandemic has approved measures towards parity and is punishing catcalling now or harassment of women. And Guatemala's experience of the platform of indigenous women, which is a unique mechanism in the region to have political weight. So we have a very challenging context, which is the pandemic. So we need to reflect what the countries in the region are doing. And this is something to learn and then mobilize. For me, it is an honor to have the participation of panelists such as yourselves who are committed. So I will start with Vice President Campbell. Question: in the last elections in Costa Rica that achieved parity in the executive and legislative branches of government, and with the pandemic, you push to establish a Council of Women to have solutions in the social, economic, and productive spheres from a woman's perspective. What do you think has been the impact of this bet to have women participate in the public life of your country? Thank you. Thank you, and I'm glad to be in this dialogue. In one way or another, the strengthening of incorporation of women go through concrete experiences, not only because of our experience or our narratives, our lives, but what we do when we are in power. It is a very dynamic construction, fortunately, and it's something that we are incorporating into politics. We learn from what we're doing and from those who are doing it better. The Women's Council, I would like to say, it's a coordination space to incorporate a vision of women from different identities about what we do in the government of the Republic. This council has characteristics that are quite particular. We have an ex-vice president of the Republic, an indigenous leader, Afro-descendant leaders, academia, the arts, social solidarity-based economy, political parties. We decided to generate this coordination space with very different perspectives and people who have the political orientation a bit to the right or a bit to the left, which is the reality of our countries. It is absurd to think that you are going to receive advice from people who think just like you, because it is minimum aggregated value. So what are the advantages and the results of this space? And in strategic actions, well, you are going to have a feedback loop. You listen, and then you can have that influence your decision. Women in the times of this pandemic promoted the incorporation of a women's perspective to provide care, especially in the first times when the government of the Republic decided to transfer resources to the sectors that were most affected. The Women's Council placed the topic on the table on how to have a concrete proposal and establish dialogue with different stakeholders for decision making, provided input, and also allowed us to have a view that was not an institutional view. And this is essential. The second is to have a critical perspective, constructive, of women with what is being done at the moment. I mean, these women are tough with us. If they don't like what we're doing at the government, they let us know candidly. And we still have a discussion on the transformation of public employment, and the Women at Council had a very different vision to the one of the government, and they said why those decisions could affect women in particular. So it was a very critical participation. And the participation entails a more dynamic dialogue between segments that could be in confrontation. Right now, we have huge challenges, critical times in general, and the pandemic has brought great impact, social, economic, but really disproportionately affecting women. Right now in Costa Rica, with the recovery that has been growing its GDP over 3% this year, has left a great number of women aside. In other words, women lost their jobs much more quickly and are recovering them much more slowly. So we have a critical view of what has happened. And the Women's Council also allowed us to define a specific path for recovery. And we are going to present the next week's perspective, a view of the Women's Council on it. We also have a high-level group on the empowerment of women, economic empowerment of women. And in this high-level group, we have decisions that are being made by the central government. And we also have an old but still working tool, which is coordination or articulation of the social institutions to basically have a program, to establish a program for women who are in poverty and extreme poverty. So we have a toolkit, but I want to finish by referring to things. To have a council is to have somebody advising you, and that advice should generate proposals, generate feedback for better public policy. In other words, they should be taken into account. And it's essential that in times of parity, we open the space to voices that allow us to expand our perspectives. This is a political transformation process, parity. And we need to have insiders like myself. We have, for the first time, we have 53% of the cabinet women. And during the administration, we have maintained a parity government with a logical turnover of an administration that is going to finish its 4-year period in 7 months. But also, we are always trying to drive actions in favor of women, such as the Gender Equality Initiative, Gender Parity Initiative, to have women in power and in formal employment. Thank you very much. Thank you, EPSI. Very clear in the importance of expanding this listening of the areas of society that are not taken into account. And this constructive criticism, maybe in other countries we don't have such a democratic participation, and that's one of the leadership qualities of Costa Rica, where we can have a commission with criticism and the social transformation that you are driving and achieving. So thank you and congratulations. Now we go with Lorenzo. Epsi, please don't leave. I have a question for you. Now, Mr. Cordova, with parity in everything and for parity decision making in the federal state and from the INE. And it is so prestigious with a lot of awe with their great advances in election aspects and training to many of these organizations.
Well, we have resolved to carry out those priority actions to guarantee the participation of the people that are Afro-descendant, with limited capacities, migrants, with the sexual diversity, and so forth. So what is the balance of the application of these measures, and how has this influenced the Mexican women in all their diversity? So please, go ahead. Thank you, Maria. It's a real privilege to be here. Greetings to all the participants of this panel with a lot of care and a lot of appreciation. Particularly, I would like to thank the organizations that have added themselves to this Atenea project, the UN Women, the IDEA International, to allow us as strategic partners to participate in the achievements of this platform. I would say, Maria, because of the shortness of time, that to be able to understand where we are nowadays in Mexico, we would have to do a view to the back. In the last 25 years, we have passed from mere recommendations that the legislation should do to the would do to the political parties to promote the life of women in the political parties, or women's participation in politics, going through quotas and through other very important decisions in the administrative and in the CIFE and then the Electoral Tribunal that put together the participation of the greater participation of women in the political electoral participation. Coming to the 12th, 2014, in the parity as a constitutional decision. I think the parity that is given to that is a parity in the candidacy. And the great challenge that we have had in these 7 years that we have undertaken the electoral transformation is how to transform that parity in the candidacy into a real representation that is a parity. And this has gone through a great number of affirmative actions that I am not going to detail, from establishing the political parties to verify that the candidacy was 50-50 between men and women, and to establish a criteria to determine under what circumstances districts and municipalities and so forth, where we have political participation, do we have greater or less competitivity? Because what happens in a country, historically, we put the parity in, the women, we put them to compete in losing locations, let's say. So there has been a great evolution of this. In 2018, we were able to, for the first time, to have a parity legislature. We had an equal participation. It was 247 women, 253 men. The thing that for the elections of this year, we had, it represented, let's say, a challenge to be able to propose that the parity had not been a matter of just a temporary appearance. Now that this was being renewed, the challenge was for this parity to be maintained. Well, starting a series of affirmative actions that were taken by the Electoral Administrative Tribunal, we achieved numbers that leave us very satisfied, although this represents a series of the challenges that to which I will refer a little later on in the future. The first great challenge is that the result is that we have, according to a decision by the tribunal, has made a cause of the discussion because it was the decision that was taken after the election had been done, after the lists had been voted, and after the candidacies had been established. That total parity established also in the Constitution a couple of years ago. It was determined that the Chamber of Congressmen and women had to be integrated by 250 men and 250 women. Additionally, to this point, this implied actions for reinforcement to what had been taken before. That undoubtedly have a polemic, that have resistance on behalf of political parties and so forth. But additional measures were taken to incorporate other groups that have been discriminated in the political participation. In this way, they established a measure so that the political parties they might be able to populate a greater number than what had been populated before of candidacies of people, men and women, that belong to communities and indigenous people, that we might have the presence of this community. The results in this sense are completely plain sight. Of the 36 congressmen and women are men and women that belong to indigenous communities. We took mandates to give possibilities to the migrants, because as you know, the migration issue in Mexico is something enormous. There's a great number of people that migrate, especially from the United States. And today we have 11 congressmen and women that represent the migrating community. 8 of the congressmen or women positions have some sort of disabilities. 6 belong to the Afro-descendants, men and women, and 4 belong to the diverse collective of the diversity. These are the results of the affirmative action that we have taken. I would like to comment another one that was also polemic or very difficult. The elections this year were enormous elections. It was the biggest elections that have been carried out in Mexico because of the number of voters as well as the number of positions that were being voted. We had 15 of the 22 mayorships, municipalities, and 32 federation. It's the biggest election that we have carried out, that are going to be carried out in the whole of Latin America. And I leave aside the topic of the pandemic because the elections multiplied an alteration in the curves of the pandemic. So with these recurring, re-established, very well-known and very well disseminated practices among the electoral organizations gave results. And the point that I want to comment that it comes along with the question that you have made is that for the first time in the great number of governors that are being voted, renovated on the same day, we established an affirmative action that was wonderful. In other words, that the political parties at a national level that compete at nationwide for all the positions, electoral positions that we have in the country, had to present at least 7 candidates to the governorships, half of them practically, which brought as a result today, we can say very proudly that 6 of the 15 governments, federal governments, were occupied by women, and we add the city of Mexico that is held by women. Today we have 7 governors, female governors. We had 7 governors in the history, but never at the same time. And we have had this reinforced for the next year. The next year we will have 6 elections of governors, and we have established that 3 of those candidacies have to be women. In summary, and sorry for expanding my time, Maria, the construction parity is not just a normative or regulations a formation. It requires that we have to have a series of commitments that are affirmative measures until we break, as Epsi was saying, that it has a political dimension. I would say that it's even worse, it has a cultural dimension. This great delay that we have that precisely implies that a democracy is either parity or it is not democracy, because we do not comply with the principle of equalness. And later on, I will, if you allow me, I will talk about the challenges that we have, because I'm just making a small paradox. Never before have we had the space of participation, political participation of women in elections. We had never had so many women elected. In some of the cases, there has been some reverse, but this has had a paradox that the political abstinence against women has also been increased. Thank you very much, Lorenzo. The truth is that it's a pleasure to listen to you, because as you were saying, as Epsi was saying, the parity democracy is seen in the actions that are carried out. And I agree with you that, and with Epsi also, it's not just a political change that has to take place, but it's a cultural change that has to take place. A cultural change that accepts women as subjects of right to be elected, and to change that structure of power that was so enrooted in Mexico. If Mexico can do it, we can do it in all the countries of the region. That is why it's so important to continue on doing it. And this paradox that you mentioned of the increase of violence is something that really concerns us from Atenea. Last year, we issued a publication that maybe the team can put it on the chat. And this is an issue that we have to give follow-up to. But thank you very much for the explanations. Let's see if all the countries that we can continue on following that that map route. Now I would like to go. I see that we have our colleague from Guatemala. Yes, she is back. She is back already. Dear Lady Esmata, I would like you to maybe tell us what is the relevance of this mechanism of platform of women, indigenous women, that we are promoting with the leadership of the Nobel Prize awardee with regard to Manchu. What is the importance of this type of mechanisms for the formulation of public policies that attend to the needs and demands of the indigenous women? So you have 5 minutes, please. Thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be able to share this space with you. I really want to thank you for the invitation that the Atenea Initiative, the UN Women, UNDP, and International, and all different organizations, IDEA International, and all the other organisms that make the seminar possible. To listen to the voice of women, especially the voice of women who have much to say, who have much to express, and we have much to propose to be able to change the reality of which we are subject. Please receive a warm greeting from those of us who integrate the platform of Indigenous Women of Guatemala. We would like to tell you that it is an instance that promotes the economic development, the social development, and political development of the indigenous women in the country. It has a view that looks that is seeking parity, that is seeking the integration of the peoples, but also the inclusion of indigenous women, especially of all conditions and of all ages. The platform of indigenous women is also an instance that in the last 2 years has created mechanisms of dialogue with a social view as bridges for communication, alliances, strategies for women with common interest that might contribute to improve the exercise of the individual and collective rights. We need these spaces to be able to express ourselves in systems that are so racist and discriminating. We women need to be able to join efforts and work jointly so that we might be able to raise our voice. The platform of Indigenous Women is a collective that groups up more than 75 leaders, female leaders from different generations. We have participants from 12 to 70, 80 years of age. We are a group that is very diverse, but also our diversity makes our proposals generate spaces for discussion that are intergenerational, that also promote the critical capacities and the knowledge to the inside. These spaces and mechanisms of dialogue, political and social dialogue, that we have been carrying out at the highest level of the state organisms allows us to really have the participation of all of us. And it's important. I was telling Maria Noel that one of the pioneers of this job is precisely our Nobel Prize awardee from 1998, Ms. Rigoberta Menchú. This for us is a historical fact in the political participation of indigenous women, because not only are they integrated in this collective, the female community leaders, the artists, businessmen, entrepreneurs, businesswomen, entrepreneurs, and all of them. The platform is a multidisciplinary collectiveness that brings together women from the different townships that are proposing and also having an influence in the design and in the proposal for public policies and projects and programs that might strengthen the participation, the substantial participation of women and the needs also of the indigenous people, so that we might really be have an influence in this system of for the country agenda, and that all the actions are carried out with a cultural respect. This is a strategic space where we have been having an influence through two different cabinets, the one of economic development and social development that are coordinated by the Vice Presidency of the Republic of Guatemala, and where we have integrated the different ministries and the different secretariats of the country, who are the direct responsible of the implementation of the public policies. And women are really making history in Guatemala, in spite of the fact that we don't have regulation that forces the political parties or forces the authorities to incorporate women into decision-making positions. We are working historically to be able to position women strategically, our Mayan sisters, in positions where they might make decisions. An example of that is that there are positions that have been occupied by non-indigenous men that are actually being held by indigenous women. An example of that would be the National Council of the Micro, Small, and Medium-Sized Enterprises. Today, 2 women from the platform are precisely holding the flag of coordination of public policies in this organism. Another example in which we have worked as a team is the influencing, so that the grandmothers, that were prioritized in the elderly in our country have a very important role, and they are in the front line. So we had them vaccinated first in the prioritization of the vaccine against COVID. So that's why it had influence for them to be vaccinated. And we are also having an influence so that in the matter of public policies and health, they may be considered, they might consider the inherited knowledge or the scientific knowledge of the indigenous people. Thank you very much. This has been very interesting, and hopefully this platform will continue on advancing so that one day we will see an indigenous woman as president of Guatemala. First of all, I would like to give a welcome to Delia Ferreira from the presidency of Transparency International. Good morning, Delia. Thank you for coming with us. We were going to have you in the next panel, but I didn't want to thank you for your participation. Now, to finalize this first round, I am going to give Macifuel, the governor of Cajamarca in Peru. Dear governor, between 2020 and 2021, Peru has approved legislature to be able to advance to the political parity and the facing of political violence against women. Which do you consider are the main challenges for the implementation of this measure at the subnational level, in the levels that you have as a governor? And what are the measures that can be taken to promote the guarantee and the decision-making that are inclusive and democratic? You have 5 minutes, please. Thank you, Governor. Thanks to all of you. Thank you for the opportunity. I would like to say, give my greetings to everybody. It is an honor to be here with Epsi, with Lorenzo, with Marlene, and with, of course, with you two also. What I would like to ask you is to Marisol, is if you could repeat the question, because we had a break in the signal. Yes, of course. The question is, in Peru, in the year 2020 and 2021, they have approved the measures, legislative measures to advance towards political parity, and also to board the issue of political violence against women in the electoral processes. What do you consider as the main challenges to be able to implement these policies, legislative policies approved at your level, at the level of subnational governments? And what other measures could you also impose to guarantee a decision-making that is inclusive and democratic, to finish with the political violence against women? Thank you, Maria, for the repeat. Sometimes there are cuts between the communication of Latin American countries. I'm going to begin, first of all, by stating that I am a person who is very convinced in regard to what it means to have the complete participation of women. Here in Peru, as you know, there is a great Andean philosophy, and in that Andean philosophy, we have always sought to have the complementary of the opposed. In the times of Coricancha, we had the god Miracocha, and in front of him, to the right and to the left, face to face, we had the Macaronidad, the masculinity and the femininity. We always looked for in the Andean philosophy to have this integration of the opposites. And among that, I would like to tell you that here in Peru, and he broke out the communication. La imagen y el sonido. We cannot hear anything, right? It seems to us that he is not listening to us. Maybe we can go back to with the governor, but I would like to, I know that Epsi and both Lorenzo have to leave, so I would go on to the second question that is the same for all the panel members. What are those three priority transformations that have to take place so that we might be able to advance into the political parity for these cultural, political, social changes, for this transformation, integral transformation, and to be able to install the parity as a democratic. FC, give us three key issues. Well, first of all, I would like to say that if we want to install the parity, we have to work on one of the topics that was seemed to be fundamental, which has to do with the job of the distribution of responsibilities in the reproductive and the private. And with this, I want to say that everything that is related to the caregiving has to be rethought from the environment of the community, the family, the state, the company, the enterprises, or the private sector, but of men and women both. Because if we say that, if we talk about stakeholders that are not persons, well, it seems that this is something that has to be done by somebody who is nobody. No. This has to do with proposing a new social agreement that has to do with the roles of each other in those spaces. In the most intimate spaces, that is the one that generates a possibility of survival to all of the society, not only to women. So it seems to me that there, and the state has a fundamental role. The private sector has a role of its own, fundamental also. And the educational and cultural system also, a greater one. I'm not only talking about the educational system related to the schools, the high schools and universities, but everybody that educates the social means, the communication media, and so forth. The second great transformation has to do with the access to resources, the access to financial resources, to training for resources, technical preparation resources, the possibility of not only being able to make business, but also to have economic autonomy based on the work of the entrepreneurship or the business. As long as the financial resources are so poorly distributed, I don't know how we're going to reach the parity. That's what I loved about when Lawrence was talking about concrete results through specific measures. An alternative in regard to which we would have to work, fundamentally for me, is to begin, that we have to begin with quotas of access to financial resources through credits, through economic and productive resources such as the earth, the land, the capital, the market, and so forth. I think that we should aspire from here to 2030 that the total of the resources that are distributed through the formal financial system, at least 30% have to be in the hands of women. Now it is ridiculous, the amount. I wouldn't say 30%, I shouldn't say 30%, I should say 50. But let's say that it has to be something scaled. And I would say that by 35 at the most, we should guarantee that those resources are distributed 50-50. And here I would like to say that the multinational banking and the international banking has a very important role. All the loans and the resources that are given to the states have to have indicators of gender. It can't be that we have a discourse on one side, and then on the other hand, when we're talking about money, the money is not labeled and it doesn't have clarity as to where it has to go. What are the impacts on the gaps and so forth. And so the budgets of the republic, the new agreement would have to say how much is the resources that we're investing, in fact, from the state are impacting. And I'm thinking about from the local to the national, what is the relative impact on women, on men, and on the reduction of gaps. And third, I would say, and I put a lot on the cultural transformation. I think that we are facing a new social agreement, and this social agreement, part of the acknowledgement of the diversity of all the people, but also of the inequities that the society has. And that is why I always have a lot of faith to the younger generations. They are more willing to change. They are more willing to be compassive. And I think that we have to change the politics, not only in numbers, but we also have to change it in perspective and point of views. We need more states that are similar to moms and that stop looking like absent dads. We need to have a policy that is the politics that is more centered on the care of life. And when I say care of life, it is the dignity of people, the rights of people, and not only with indicators. And even though we say that they are not the most important ones, these are the ones that we use to say that we are in reactivation or not. And finally, we are in a recovery that has to be done. The recovery, the economic recovery, we have to give it a woman's name. If we don't put a woman's name to it and we don't put priorities to it, then it has to be green, it has to be sustainable, and it has to have very well labeled a feminine identity and those other identities that are being historically hurt. We cannot think that we have a recovery that is also neutral, because that neutrality affects those who are already in a condition of disadvantage. So with that, thank you very much. For me, it was a great pleasure always to participate and to be able to feedback myself on wonderful ideas and also of an energy that we have to connect to. We need to do this with a lot of passion, with a lot of conviction, and knowing that next to us we have an ally. We need more men within this grid of parity and equity, making their own job not only a discourse to the outside, but also to the internal agreements, to the job, to the at home, because that's the way we make the transformation be more efficient, more quicker, and to give us this equalness and justice that we women are aspiring for. Wonderful, FC. Thank you very much. And you give us a lot to think about, mainly in regard to the co-responsibility of the men, of also in the caregiving. You are also giving us the importance of the financial independence, let's say, in the matter of entrepreneurships, female entrepreneurships in technology. Women that lead are only 2% of the capital. It's ridiculous. There is such a big inequity in that sense that it is impossible if we don't make specific measures towards that. And that cultural transformation, we have it with a lot of energy. And thank you for always counting on you for this events, because your energy is transmitted. It is really transmitted. So thank you very much, Madam Vice President. And now I would like to go on to Lorenzo Cordova. I don't know if you can connect again, Lorenzo. I would like to make you the same question. As we mentioned in the introduction, there are transformations that are priorities that should be generated to be able to advance in this environment of parity, democratic parity. You said it yourself, we need a change, not only political, but also cultural, integral of the institutions that we know. What would be for you the 3 transformations that would have to take place? Go ahead, Lorenzo, please. Thank you, Maria. Before all, I would like to excuse, because after I finish, I have to leave. We have a session of the General Council, and the Council does not work without who presides. So my excuse in advance and my very deep appreciation to you. I am telegraphic. First of all, start from a premise that what has been reached not necessarily came here to stay. There might be regressions, and we have to care for these advancements that we have had, because just like democracy, if you take it for granted, the day after that, you might wake up having lost it, and we have to take care of it. In the same sense, I put an example. We have given good numbers in terms of, and looking at the electoral aspects regarding these affirmative actions, and nevertheless, and we see it in the Congress, and we see it in the federal Congress, and we see it in local Congresses, where 53% of the legislatures that were elected in June are women, but also in the municipal level, where we had a shameful 27% of mayors, that number has been reduced to a little over 25%. So regressions, we have them. So And that is something that happens because the affirmative actions depend on institutions, and the institutions change. So what we took today as an affirmative action today, tomorrow, with a different integration, we might have it reversed. So I think that we have to put the laws under the premise that in the future, hopefully the affirmative actions are not necessary, but while we have those conditions of the inequity, structural inequity, we are going to have them. Second great challenge for the necessary transformation, the one that has been mentioned already, the political violence against women. The more participation women have, the greater index of violence we're generating, which evidently indicates to carry out a series of measures of sanctioning with exemplary these type of violence. All violence is contrary to democracy. The violence that affects the logic of the parity principle is a violence that is not acceptable in a democratic environment. It's not easy. In Mexico, we did a proposal in this sense. We did a criminal issue of who commits political violence against the women as a matter of gender, but it is very difficult to say. So here we have the risk of not translating the results that we are expecting. But be careful with this. There is a series of measures. There is a second transformation when we have this second challenge. And third place. And in this sense, I have the music to accompany what Pepsi was proposing. The problem is a problem of depth. It is a structural aspect. It is a cultural aspect. And from this point of view, I think that we have to put a great bet on this, and this has to be a priority so that when we have positions. And I'd like to talk about culture is not education, because the education would seem something that has to come from the top, that the culture is built from the bottom. And the great challenge in our societies is that the principles and values of democracy, including the value of parity, which is a value that is structural of the democratic systems, because at the end of democracy is the inclusion and the participation of the people, men and women, has to be something that has to be transcendental. It's not a responsibility of an organism. It's not a responsibility of the organisms. It's not only a responsibility of the parties. It's something integral, and that is how, as EPSI was proposing, measures of public policy that should be strengthened in the economic aspect and so forth, and the management of the resources that can strengthen the empowerment of women in the political processes of decision making. Well, evidently, this is an aspect. The electoral is another aspect, but that has to be done as something integral. A democratic culture is, by definition, a parity culture, and those values have to be built from the base as they are constructed, all the cultural changes. Thank you very much. And once again, my greetings to all of you.
Excellent, Lorenzo. Great food for thought for our panel. And thank you for your participation. And now you can go preside your council. Thank you for being available to discuss these topics. See you soon. The regional president of Cajamarca is back, so we can give him the floor now. So the regional governor of Cajamarca, the question is, what do you consider are the main challenges to implement legislative measures that were advanced in Peru regarding political violence against women and political parity? So in at your level, what do you think the main challenges are and which other measures could be driven? So Mr. Guevara, you have the floor. Thank you for the connectivity issue. As we said, I'm really convinced about the full participation of women at all levels: political, employment, academia, entrepreneurial even. And right now in Peru, we are going towards a positive outcome, but not at the speed we would like. Right now in Peru, we have about 40% of representatives in the Congress are women. from 26% before. So it's a big progress. Now we have the president of the Council of Ministers is a woman. Also, the president of the judicial branch and of the Congress of the Republic. And we have great leaders in different spheres. However, we must be aware that it is not still where we want it to be, where we want visible protagonism by women. We need to strengthen our different parties where we can strengthen the democratic participation of women so they can showcase their abilities. Because women are the big protagonists of change, the big actors of change, not only the pillars of society at home, but also of the transformation of society and the state. Today, we have women that are shining due to their capacity, their intelligence, but don't have a democratic space in which to unfold. So we're making advances, not at the speed we would like. And here in Peru, in the regional governments, we have vice governors who are women, but we still don't have governors who are women. So we have regional advisors, but not in the sufficient numbers. We also have mayors who are women and older women or council members who are women. We are making progress, but not there yet. We need full participation of women, and that would be the great democratic participation that can be at the political party level, where unfortunately reforms are not unfolding as we would like them. So we have a proposal here in Cajamarca. We are striving for democracy 4.0 to foster full participation by women. If they cannot be present face-to-face, let's use ICTs, information and communication technologies, so they can participate remotely to promote their leadership. We have a great concept, as I said before, here in Peru. The indigenous culture talks about complementarity. In our concept, there is no place for male chauvinism or female chauvinism. And that phrase as behind every great man, there's a great woman, I don't agree with it either. It's next to a great man, there's a great woman, or next to a great woman, there's a great man. That is our Andean philosophy, complementarity. We have to continue training, socializing, and demanding from political parties in general and regional governments as well to respect parity. And on the table, another concept, alternates. And these topics have to be accelerated a bit if we want to rescue what we consider a very valuable instrument, women as a protagonist of change, as a main actor of change. We can do that with training, like courses, and continue with reforms to foster participation of women. We have a small anecdote. I'm a militant of the Popular Action Party. The president of Congress, woman, is a woman. She was in the second place in the list. She was elected, and now she's the president of the Congress. And it is product of this law on parity that we have in Peru. So, to recap, we have made progress, still not there yet, but we are still focused on the end goal to continue consolidating the political and electoral reforms Peru needs. Thank you, Mr. Guevara, Governor. I love this Democracy 4.0 because we were able to continue operating virtually during the pandemic, and we can use this to reach remote communities we would not be able to reach otherwise. So I like the fostering, the promoting, the protagonism and leadership of women. And we are really glad that we have Congress being presided by a woman at the moment. And please don't leave because I will have another question for you, but I would like to go back to Marlene. And as we said in the introduction, the consolidation goes beyond of having just a number of women in policy space. We need cultural changes, social changes, policies dealing with integrate comprehensive reform of institutions so women have a space to participate in equal opportunities. So for you, which are the three main transformations to make progress in this sense? And let's try to make it a brief answer because you only have 4 minutes, and Mr. Governor, you will be next. So, Marlene, you have the floor. Thank you. It is a very interesting question, difficult to answer, as good questions are, because you have to analyze the different contexts of inequality, but an essential element to transform our democracies into parity democracies is to recognize differences. We have multiple ways to discriminate and exclude based on differences, especially born by indigenous women, women in general, and to make these difficulties visible, we can start working to value women as subjects or of rights, not objects of rights, but subjects. We are trying to overcome these barriers, but one of the first elements would be that. Second element can be to strengthening reforms or regulatory frameworks. Guatemala, as we mentioned before, we do not have an electoral law or political party law that has an approach to promote parity. And we have alarming figures of women's participation. And we're talking about substantive participation even more. Of course, of 340 local governments, only 12 are presided by women. 160 representatives, only 40 women. Only one ministry is headed by a woman. We have big challenges ahead, but our determination, our collective fight will be able to strengthen this effort to demand authorities take notice that we need to reform our electoral law. And we are really happy about this initiative of 10 representatives that was presented in March, which requires the Congress of the Republic to pay attention and support parity and alternance. So women can occupy these spaces in equal conditions and that indigenous peoples also have access to it. Another element is to promote awareness spaces about rights and equality that should exist between men and women with an intercultural approach. Many women in Guatemala do not speak Spanish. They speak Mayan, Quiche, or their own native language. So we need to raise awareness and to reach these communities. So women know about their rights, can be valued, feel they're valued, and if they have the inclination or vocation to enter these spaces, they can do so without discrimination, with necessary regulations to be able to consolidate parity democracies. In Guatemala, we have a lot to work on. We need the support of the government, authorities, private sector, civil society, so we can jointly transform this reality. Thank you. Very interesting, Mr. Guevara, Mr. Governor. What do you think are the three main or priority transformations to continue advancing towards parity as a democratic principle. As I said before, the first thing we have to do is to consolidate regulations, and this should be done jointly between the Congress of the Republican political parties because we need consensus there. And I can accept that this consensus is not there yet. We have some interests that are opposing this. So a comprehensive electoral reform, taking into account the system, should be done. We have Renier, OMPE, and the National Tribunal of Elections, and they have their own electoral ecosystem, which unfortunately is not consolidated. There have been questions about it, and we saw it in the last electoral process where there were questions about the election of our current president, and we even had claims filed before the OAS. So we have to consolidate our political reform in Peru to give stability and institutionality to this process. So first challenge is to institutionalize or achieve the institutionality of our process. Also, we have to achieve the institutionality of political parties. We still don't have it. We don't have, I can tell you that of traditional parties, which is 65 years old this year, it is the only party that is registered in the electoral register. And the other parties lost the registration. There was no institutionality. There was internal fighting. So not only women, but the national constituency of these political parties, including the youth, are suffering from this anomaly, which is also a setback. The third big transformation is in citizens. We need proper citizens that are informed and participate actively, that do not fear politics, because they fear politics is kind of opaque activity, and many valuable people don't want to participate in it because of its reputation. So, for example, we should limit campaign expenses. People may want to participate, but they could be intimidated by groups of power that only show the power of money. So they intimidate these valuable people from participating. So I think that the main first step is to reform the electoral system and then strengthen the institutionality of political parties that become democratic spaces for the full participation of all militants. And I hope that next year, when we have regional municipal elections, we can consolidate primaries, because some people were interested in suppressing primary elections. So for the first time, we will have primary elections where civil society will have a voice. So it's going to be internal and external scrutiny of our candidates. Another thing that we have to consolidate, in my party, we're practicing it, and political affiliation would be needed for the primaries in a party. So we have discipline, party discipline in a way, and to recognize active militancy in a political party, and also to recognize different points of view. And for that, we are going to have primaries. And finally, I would like to say that we need to train people, educate people. We need responsible people. We are consolidating Peru that says voting for a corrupt person is not a victim, it's an accomplice. And we have to understand that. We have to educate people, train people in that aspect to avoid this vicious cycle. And maybe make it a virtuous cycle where the electorate can express their vote based on proposals, not kickbacks. And this is what Peru has to consolidate in the short term. Thank you. Thank you. And these are three topics that I would think we should consolidate region-wide, because political parties are the vehicle that we need to use to make democracy more efficient. But if you have 50 competing parties, it is difficult for the electorate to choose responsibly. That's why you need active, militant citizens and also strong parties, as we used to have in the past. Thank you for your reflections. Thank you, everybody. Ismata and all of you, thank you so much. It has been a pleasure being with you. I am sorry that, but we are a bit late. So we're going to go back to Pilar. So we go with the next panel. Thank you, Madam Ismata, Mr. Guevara, and thank you so much. Thank you, Maria Noel, for moderating this first panel and the panels that we had. FC Campbell, Vice President of Costa Rica, Lorenzo Cordova, President of the National Electoral Institute of Mexico, Marlene Macario from the Platform of Indigenous Women in Guatemala, and Mrs. Guevara, Regional Governor of Cajamarca. It has been a very interesting session with very interesting progress made, but with still big challenges and gaps that are preventing truly parity democracy. As Lorenzo said, regulatory progress is important, not enough in themselves. We need political progress and cultural progress. And we need to build our parity democracy as a function of these dimensions. So we're closing the first panel, and we are going to start the second one for this morning. The big election cycle 2021-2024, challenges and opportunities to advance political rights of women. We give again welcome to those who are connecting and those who are with us already since the first panel. This panel is going to be moderated by Daniel Salvato, Regional Director of ID International for Latin America and the Caribbean. And with him, we have Jimena Arbillo, President of COPAL Women Permanent Conference of Political Parties of Latin America. Masters in Public Policy and Local Government and Regional Counselor in Chile. Also, previously, we also have Delia Ferreira, President of Transparency International, attorney, member of the Board of Alliance for Open Governments, ex-president of the organization Citizens Power in Argentina as well. Also, with the participation, Lisandra Rolón, member, Uñarroga in Paraguay, communicator with experience in popular communication in community radio, which is called Candela de Cuñarroga. She's also been national coordinator of the 6th Global Monitoring of Media in Paraguay. And finally, we have Alejandra Salazar, attorney, assessor of the Colombia's electoral process, a specialist in election law. And we would like to thank you for being with us. And we are going to be participating in this space. And now we're going to give the floor, as we said before, the methodology is going to be the same. Moderator Daniel Sabato is going to ask individual questions to the panelists. There are going to be 4 minutes for answers, and then we're going to have another round of questions. 4 minutes each. So there you have the floor. Thank you, Pilar. Morning to all. It's a pleasure being in this great regional seminar that we started yesterday, and twice as pleased for being able to moderate this panel with 4 great panelists: Jimena, Delia, dear friend, Lisandra, and Maria Alejandra. So I'm sure we are going to have great conversation on central topic on how we can find concrete recommendations in this tripod that we thought about: political willingness, cultural changes, and policy. So we can profit from the electoral super cycle of the region, where all countries in the region, except Bolivia, are going to hold elections, both presidential and legislative. Also important, subnational legislations and referenda will take place. But we are going to focus on presidential legislative elections. Great window to continue advancing the agenda in favor of democracy with inclusion, effective parity. And as we said before, we have to join efforts within the framework of Atenea and others. So we have more women. So these women can stay in politics once they get there. And how we can stop political violence that many women in our country are experiencing. And how we are going to talk also about how we deal with political financing. So it becomes a facilitating, not a limiting factor for the political participation of women. So with this brief introduction, we are going to present or introduce our 4 panelists. We already talked about the methodology. The first part, it is 1 question to each of our panelists, different questions, to make it as dynamic as possible. And then we're going to have a general question for all panelists, and then we're going to close. So we are going to start with Jimena. And the question is the following. Progress to quotas and parity in the region has allowed more women to access decision-making positions, especially in the legislative branch. However, and throughout this conference, we have always said it, we have made progress, but, or however, those are going to be the most common words we hear. So, however, we still have important challenges to reach equality. Regional government is about 30 to 31% representation of women in national legislative assemblies or congresses. So progress, yes, long way to go still. So Jimena, which are the main commitments and measures that have to be advanced within political parties and countries so we can advance towards political culture that is free from discrimination and violence against women? You have the floor. Thank you, Danielle. Thank you for this invitation. And please let me know when we have a minute yet. And we would like to send greetings from Copal Women's. And this is a agglutination of 69 political parties from 30 countries in North America and the Caribbean. Some men know it, some others do not. But as Copal, which we come from the political world, we have representation in governments, municipalities, local governments, regional governments. It is a big challenge what you are saying, because today politics are not in good health or have a great reputation. A lot of issues have led women and people to consider that politics is not listening, or listening in a timely fashion, always going behind the advance that society as a whole is making. For example, today, you can see active participation by women in social governments, even political participation. This is not seen in more than 30% of participation, which would ensure better participatory democracy and especially participation of women in politics. This is a big challenge. And last time, Latin America had women presidents. A few years ago, we had 5 women presidents, and they were measured with a very different yardstick. Nobody talks about the family of the man or who's taking care of the children of the men, but all women presidents, you are asking the president of a country about their family and their children. So we have different yardsticks. The only country in Latin America and the Caribbean that has a law since 2010, but after the death of a political leader, and other countries have made progress in certain indications. We have an important report of the UN on a study to be able to have indications regarding this. But we have an invisibilization of political violence. Women have difficulty making progress. They have difficulties getting finance, being visible. They are not leading processes. And we have listened to different panelists. And this, look, post-pandemic, at a global level, we had the countries led by women had different communication, different handling of the pandemic compared to those governed by men. And this generated a radical change in controlling the pandemic, following up on it, on the cases, investment, and as a previous panelist said, has to deal with how women look at public policy, public life. So from COPAL, we have developed work that allow women to have greater visibility. And you only have a minute left, sorry. And there is a structural change in policy. This politics right now are still a bit male-oriented and a bit linear. And today, if we look at the challenges of the countries in Latin America, for example, the indigenous people, so we have a different way of thinking and doing politics. So we have 2 documents, one with the Census 2020 and these documents are stressing on political structural changes in the countries to advance in parity. Quotas are necessary, but today we are seeing a substantive change. In structural change, we need culture on how women are invisible and should be considered in institutional public policy, and to build citizenship. We still don't have enough progress.
Thank you very much, Jimena. It was a wonderful beginning. I rescue several things that you said. On the one hand, policy doesn't have a good health, and I would say neither a good reputation. Secondly, a politics that is running behind society. The topic of double standard that demands a lot from women. Women constantly have to be rendering examination, which is very complacent with men. The political evaluation of women, and the aspect that politics continues being very hierarchic and machoist. Excellent punctuation to begin with this conversation. Delia, it's a pleasure to see you. We have not been together for a long time in a panel like in the old times, so it's a very, very big pleasure to greet you, to give you that welcome, and to make you the question in a topic that both of us, we have been in love for a while. So it's the financing is one of the barriers that women face that want to participate in politics. In view of the disproportional impact of the pandemic and the economic autonomy of many Latin American females, what is your criteria, Delia, to those actions that should be promoted to guarantee an equal political treatment and inclusive in the region that will aim to have a better participation of women in the decision making in their own countries? Your 5 minutes are up. They are here, Delia. Thank you, Daniel. It's a pleasure to see you. A topic that has been held us in love for the last 30 years, I would say. We have advanced a lot of the inclusion of women in Latin America, and we can have the glory of saying that Latin America is one that has advanced in the financial topic of politics of women in politics. Obviously, this is a topic that we're going to deal with in these 5 minutes. Is something instrumental and very small in the sense that we have a cultural change that is necessary and that has been mentioned by the other panel members. So I'm going to be very concrete in this very specific topic, taking for granted everything else that has been mentioned already. I think that in the topic of financing for the participation of women in politics, understanding politics as an electoral competition to have decision-making position. I love the fact that the seminar, that the summit went beyond that and talked about the decision-making, not necessarily the participation in the political positions. But for this topic of financing, we have focused on this. We're going to focus on this, and there are different moments in which the tools that may contribute to the representation of women are different. These moments are, from my point of view, the need to have a construction of an image that I want to participate in the installation of the image, the formation and the installation of the leaderships. In these two moments that are prior to the electoral moment said so, the standards may contribute, but they are not the main instrument that we have to use. Here we have non-normative solutions that can be more important. But without a construction of image and without the installation of a leadership, it is much more difficult later to be able to come, even having funds, to an electoral moment. This electoral moment is the second moment, from my point of view, that comprehends the nomination of candidates, the electoral campaigns, and the election itself. And in this moment, the standards or the regulations might play a very important role to guarantee the parity of the participation of women, or an effective participation of women. These regulations will only be effective, and I'm going to give some examples, if they are adapted to the political, social, economic, historical concept, to the system of government and the electoral system of each one of the countries. It's not a matter of just copying and pasting measures from one system to another without taking into account all these contexts. Number two, they have to be very clear regulations that are written with absolute certainty, and they have to be applied. If we don't have strong mechanisms of implementation of these standards or regulations, the regulations themselves are not going to be enough. And the third moment that we need is the moment, and it's the moment that we talk the least about, is the moment of the consolidation of the presence of women in politics. And I refer to the need of having resources at the moment of exercise of the session. And we can do a lot about this with the regulations from the parliamentary budgets, especially, that will guarantee that women will have the resources in equal conditions with the males that are in the parliamentary positions. And a second sub moment comes after the session. And in this, we have to think about it. But if you want to continue on participating in politics, you have to start thinking about how you're going to finance the moment after the elections. Regulation solutions, taking into account the context and taking into account that the regulations have to be applied effectively. The public financing for the nomination, the primaries, for example, with the guarantee that the distribution is going to be equitable. And this is going to be taken to the candidate, and the regulations have to be very clear. The regulation of distribution to the inside of the political parties, funds that are received both from public as well as from private sources. If the parties are the ones that manage the resources of the campaign, there has to be regulation that have to be imposed in the bylaws of the political party. Not only regulations created by the parties, but also regulatory. You have 1 minute left. If the financing goes to the political parties, it is a system. If it goes to the candidates, we have to have specific regulations to guarantee equalness. If public financing aimed at training, aimed at the formation of women in spaces in the medias, when they give spaces in the communication media, Brazil guarantees that 10% of the space is for a woman to be in front of the cameras. And well, we could say many, many other things, but it is also necessary to have non-regulatory solutions that make the presence of women in the political process, the economic autonomy of women, and the formation of a supporting basis for the leadership of women. And that I don't have enough time to continue on. Thank you very much, Delia. Wonderful. A very good menu of very concrete recommendations of each one of the stages of the cycle, from the installation of the image of women to the installation of the leadership, then to the electoral campaigns, during the campaigns, when they reach the power, and then after that. If all the complete cycle and all those moments. For the second part, I would like everybody to start thinking, what kind of an impact is this having with the topic of the growing virtualization of the electoral campaigns? Because before it was easier to regulate traditional means, but now with the social networks, with campaigns that are being virtual every day more, how can we guarantee, if it's possible, balance, floor of equity in the case of women? And I'm going to go with you, Lisandra. I give you the warmest welcome. Thank you for adding yourself to this wonderful panel. And I ask you the same question. The question is just as I did it with the two prior panel members. From your organization, Cunha Roga, you clearly accompany and support women who participate in the political process through trainings, as it was well pointed out by Delia, and in actions in the influencing of the territories. Now, in view of the municipal elections of 2021 that have just taken place, what actions have taken place to strengthen the participation of women and to promote electoral process that is free of political violence based on gender, but also what effect has the change had in the electoral system of a closed list and blocked to closed list and unblocked? Then this makes it dynamic, the possibility of having not an issue of quotas, but an issue of parity. And the results, what practical consequences has this change had in the electoral system? Your 5 minutes are, Lisandra, starting right now. Thank you for your presence. Good morning. Thank you. I'm very appreciative for the invitation on behalf of the Cunha the organization. Cunha is in our Guarani language. It means House of Women. And we work in Paraguay, Asunción, in Paraguay since 1998 in the promotion of the rights of women. Well, in regard to our companionship, our work in the framework of these municipal elections with women, in 2019, since 2019, we have had an initiative we have carried out an initiative, a specific initiative, and we call it Let's Add Women, which is precisely to support and to strengthen these capacities of the women in the municipal elections. And starting with this, we deal with 3 actions mainly, which is the formation, the incidence, and the communication. These, we carry this out since 2019 to this year, 2021, that we had the elections. In the framework of the training or preparation, we prepared almost 300 leader women in politics, in the democratic participation, the rights of women, the judicial systems at the municipal level, the financing system, and so forth. In regard to the incidents or influencing, we have been able to have a lab of ideas, a space for action and reflection of women from different profiles, from the academia, intellectuals, and so forth. And it is a space where we precisely dedicate ourselves to the lobbying. And with this space, we have started preparing ourselves for the cases of political violence that appeared and that showed themselves the strongest throughout this electoral process. And in regard to the communication, we even came to the point of carrying out a campaign of differentiation and positioning of the different candidacies in our territories that are from the Capay Guairá, where we are as women. It is 5 departments that we deal with. And the political violence is a topic that the truth being said, is something that really scared us because we saw it more strongly in this context. And as I mentioned before, the new electoral systems, it is closed and blocked. It made that many women that do not have the financing, the political financing, the resources like the men normally have, they were the ones that were most affected. So it is there that we, starting with this lab, we started positioning our positions. We move this to the political violence, the topic that is right now under scrutiny. We accepted this electorally because there are less women that have access to this. We see boards that are made mainly by men, and it is really unequal, that dispute that it takes place with the power, especially because of the topic of the lack of resources, the lack of financing of political violence, the care giving that women have to take care, and it has been mentioned by the other panel members. There are many things that affect the culture, the advancement, the anti-rights movements, and the violence. The political violence is something that we really have seen very strongly installed in this process. So, since it is the first election, we don't know how this might affect us in the long term, but it is the participation, and the political participation of women is based on this will start reducing more. Paraguay is one of the countries in the region with less participation of women in the decision making, and clearly this new electoral system is not going to make this get any stronger. So we are also paying attention to this and to see how we can continue on advancing based on this new reality. We have noticed that in spite of giving these tools, because we have been in a process that's very rich in regard to the preparation, but we have noticed that these tools, in spite of the fact that the women were somehow empowered at the moment of giving the practice in the physical space and the dispute of the political arena, is very difficult, and many of them have mentioned it. They have mentioned that the process empowered them, that it made them become aware, and it encouraged them to dispute in those spaces. But at the moment of the reality, it is very difficult. And precisely in these last few days, we were talking with them after this electoral process, and we wanted to say that not to buy votes, because it is very common to have votes fought here. It is the man who are the ones who buy the votes here. It's the man with the greatest resources. It's naturalized. And so women who do not have resources, who do not want to buy votes because they want to make something, a different policy, they say we didn't go in because this or that other reason. So the truth is, out of our almost 300 women, the more politics that we have, it is very few women who really were able to access that space of representation in the municipal boards. Thank you very much, Lisandra. Very important this that you have been pointing out. Beyond the preparation, the lobbying, the communication, the support, the empowerment, at the moment of truth, when we have to dispute on the field, the effects have been very limited because the perverse incentives of bad practices and so forth end up prevailing, made even worse by the use of a new electoral system that conspires against a greater participation. So I believe that this is an element that we have to take very much into account, because beyond the cultural elements, which of our strategies are very well developed from the methodological point of view, rational point of view, what is the impact and the efficacy that they have on the field, and at the same time, how is it that you want to play with if you want to play with clear and clean rules to look for a different political campaign, it ends up dying in the competition. So the incentive is perverse. The incentive is that if I play honestly, I lose the election. So we do a lot of a campaign with a lot of transparency, with a lot of accountability, but at the end I lose it. So with this, I would like to recover this with you in the second part. So what are you thinking about in Paraguay in view of all these issues? And the other aspect that you mentioned that is of great interest to me, because it covers the whole region, is this discourse, this offensive, conservative offensive that comes from the churches, evangelic, and also from the Catholic churches, with a discourse against gender, anti-women, anti-abortion, anti-divorce, et cetera, et cetera. What effect is this having in the Paraguayan politics, and how is that having its repercussions in the topic of women? And I go now on to the fourth panel member, Alejandra. And the question to you, Alejandra, apart from giving you the welcoming and thanking you and sending a very warm greeting to our dear friend, President Doris, which also we've heard that we've been told that she has a health problem. She has not been able to accompany us. A very warm hug from all of us. Alejandra, the pandemic by COVID-19 has presented and continues on presenting challenges, additional challenges for women that want to present themselves as candidates to popular election positions. We were talking about this, topic of campaigns that recently were with ritualization. There are other women who are having the issue of home care at home, and this has limited their participation time and so forth. So what do you consider is the priority actions that the electoral organism should adopt to guarantee the complete exercise of the political rights of women in this electoral super cycle from 2021 to 2024? What should be done from the organisms to the electoral organisms to favor this participation of women? Your 5 minutes start now. Alejandra. Thank you, Dr. Daniel. Thank you to all of you and to all the group of experts that we have here today, and that we are meeting in pro of sharing certain ideas, a virtue of the strengthening of our democracies in Latin America and the world. Basically, the electoral organization, the Electoral Council of Colombia, has been implementing some strategies that are dealing with the strengthening of the companionship of the legislative system, starting from the construction of the bets towards paritary democracy, and from the taking of decisions, affirmative decisions, that will allow us to promote the participation of women and to have these actions. One of them that was here applied in the year 2019, where they're opening or making it possible the inscription of lists for public positions of only women. And in that sense, the Electoral Council has focused not only on making a reconstruction, a judicial reconstruction, but in a contribution at the legislative level, but also support from the creation and the administrative to be able to have the positivism of some regulations that will allow these type of rights. And within these new strategies, they have put their bets on some pilot tests based on which women are not only will not only participate in the scenarios of academic training, but also will participate in scenarios such as the international mission of electoral observation of gender. And in that sense, for these next elections, they are putting their bets on the formation of a group of female auditors and observers that, as much as possible, will overview the parity. The parity seen not only as a academic training, but also as a scenario where women will firsthand interiorize and compile the realities that are lived in each one of the different electoral processes. Another one of the bets of the National Electoral Council for Latin America is focused on the need of agreement with the political parties, agreement with the different political stakeholders that are part of all the scaffolding of the electoral process, and based on that concentration, to create some projects of political participation to even relate where we can have events that are led by the electoral organization, and that we might share these practices with the political parties with the purpose of reducing the specific scenarios of violence and of inclusion of the trans persons and inclusion of all the minority groups with which the electoral organization is aimed. And for us to go on a little bit to the scenario of academic preparation, to inserting the woman in all the stages of the electoral process, in the electoral and the post-electoral and the electoral and the post-electoral, but as a visible process, but not only seeing this as a subject that makes up the list towards positions that are publicly elected, but also to be part of all the process of education, of observation, electoral observation, with the purpose that we can see from these women in the new scenarios that they might understand the relevance to be able to understand these elements in the electoral stages, and that they may be able to focus on how this is lived on the street and how is it lived from the position of women, and how from the position of women you can do democracy. So it is not enough for just to do political reform. We need to achieve the cultural validity, social validity for our approach also, in which we might have a acceptability of the insertion of the woman into these scenarios of participation. And we are putting our best on this pool of strategies of auditors, observers, and so that they might have adopt these principles of equalness, so that we can insert the woman in this new era of digital communication, that we are putting this woman into the new era of political marketing. And how can we do it from the institutionality to install them in that parity community that goes beyond gender or beyond a 50%. We need to expand the way of representative governance. And in that sense, that we have understood that we need an institutional and social parity in gender. And Alejandra, so we are going through the, we have 1 minute. Okay, so the inclusive democracies and towards these new measures of positive action that would look for an effective parity, promoting even an affirmative action where women will participate as locators within the electoral list of the political parties, and to make visible that a representation of interculturality with technological mechanisms and electoral. And with that, thank you. Thank you very much, Maria Alejandra. A wonderful presentation. I would like to point out a couple of points that you mentioned. First, as part of inserting women in all the stages of the electoral process, very similar to what was being proposed by Delia, of having this holistic view of all the process, a more holistic integral view. Second, the topic of giving more starting role in legitimacy to the women in each one of those stages. And third, the missions of electoral observation with the perspective of gender would be good. In the second stage, you tell us what the results have been, because I have seen that we have a mission in the case of Paraguay, and it would be important to extract from that what were the main conclusions that came out from that mission to Paraguay. And also, what we had talked at a given moment, the question that I made to Delia, of how do we give more starting role and visibility to the women in the new era of digital citizenship. This is a new topic that is somewhat disruptive, and that the old tools that we had to be able to play with the issue of guaranteeing or ensuring participation and visibility of women in the traditional media in this new era of social networks and digitalization, we have to rethink it. So thank you very much. Excellent. The 4 presentations. I think that they have given us a lot of good recommendations and good ideas to talk about. And now we're going to go on to the final part of the panel. And here the organizers have brought down from 5 to 4 minutes each one of the questions. And we thank you for having attached yourself to the given time. Each response is going to have 4 minutes, and we have one common question for all of you, without the prejudice that each one of you can add into the question those aspects that we want to point out that have been left in the previous participation. But I beg you to please bind yourself to the 3 minutes. The first question is, what are the main challenges that the Latin American countries have to guarantee the democratic electoral process where women can enjoy completely their political rights in equal conditions? The general part, we saw it. The regulatory, we saw it. The conditions are there, but not sufficient. We have to continue on pushing through the political willingness, and we have to make changes in the topic related to culture. That virtuous triangle, as we might call it. But now, I would like you to please tell us if you can give us recommendations. Don't try to give 5, 6, 7. Just what are the 3 main recommendations that you would give that each one of you thinks that we should give a priority to in the agenda for the electoral super cycle 2021 to 2024 to guarantee democracy with effective parity. So I begin now with our first presenter, who is Jimena. Jimena, your 4 minutes start now.
Thank you, Daniel. Can you hear me? Yeah. Yeah, we can hear you. Thank you, Daniel. First, I think that awareness has to be there. We are aware of our space in society and politics and the potential we have in each of the spaces that we unfold in, organic, institutional, especially. Okay, there we can only make progress, but I would like to point out that not only religious groups have a more conservative view. We have several political groups and governments that are leading processes that are against the progress made by women, which is hidden a bit in the pandemic. And this has seen a 10-point retreat in the participation of women in the economy because they are caring for the family. So with all this, politics becomes a secondary endeavor, a secondary concern, but also opportunities. And here I want to be self-referencing. After the social upheaval in 2019, we are creating a new constitution, and the constitutional body is parity, and we have incoming and outgoing parity. Parties had to have parity lists, and the election of the constituent members had to be parity. Maybe you wanted to buy your way in, but we needed to have parity. So this is a fundamental topic. Today, governments and political parties have to consider legislative process and changes where parity is effective, not discord, a fact. And we have to focus on candidates, not only parties, because with parties, we can see the loss of visibility of women or reallocation of resources. So in all election instances, local level, parliament, legislative assembly, etc., we need parity, incoming and outgoing. Main element. financing of politics, which is very relevant topic. Third would be training and to make visible new generations of women politicians. And we are invisible to each other sometimes. So how can we generate training plans, work plans where effectively more women from different walks of life, because we have a lot of diversity, how they can be part of the construction of the present and the future. Third, strategic partnerships with different institutional organizations. I really would like to congratulate you. Political parties should be part of the conversation. That's essential because we have a cultural shift and we need a new social pact, political, economic, where the role of women is made visible and effectively prioritized. And this is a topic that is still a challenge. And another one is, I want to say that there are institutions and organizations that have instructions, guidelines, and a lot of information. And we have elections where we can install a project, a discourse, what women need in our country. So now is the time to be able to establish thematic guidelines for what we need. For example, we need child care policies so we can contribute to the democratic construction, political construction, economic construction of our countries. And very few countries have seen childcare as an issue with the proper financing, of course. Discourse has to become action because we hear a lot of wonderful speeches, but action remains the same, paltry. And I know that we don't have a lot of time, so I want to finish with a phrase by Michel Bachelet. When women enters politics, a woman enters politics, the woman changes. When a lot of women enter politics, politics changes. I mean, yeah, you were out of time, but I didn't want to tell you because it was such an engaging number of ideas, incoming and outgoing. We might want to ask whether this Chilean example can be reproduced and where it could be reproduced to try to promote a change which is unprecedented. When instead parity incoming and then outgoing. So the first reaction is, okay, great, okay. You have to enter the I think it's representation on a big scale. And secondly, financing, which they're going to go with Delia. Then training and making women visible. And the new generations also, strategic partnerships, and 5, to insert in negotiation a new social pact with a cultural shift. Then childcare or care in general as a central topic of public policy, and then the awareness is no return. That would be a great slogan. And we have to go from discourse to action. Thank you very much, Jimena. Delia, you have the floor. And I agree with everything she said. So we are going to focus on financing. Something very important. We must make a step, take a step forward. A lot of countries have a percentage of financing for women's training, etc., etc. Some have it. The ones that don't have it must consolidate it, and we have to go with the recommendation. Very important one for women's participation. The mechanism for public financing that is chosen, whether contributions or reimbursement of expenses, will be a determining factor. The system for reimbursement does not favor women's participation when resources are the problem, because we've seen with studies in the countries that one of the main problems is to get the money, fundraising. If I have problems with fundraising, so to get the resources afterwards. So first, first you drop the liquid and then you put the coaster. No, you need possibly a hybrid system, contribution for competition, and then you can reimburse expenses. We can work well with this, both from the point of view of the legal aspects and work with social organizations to have incentives for private contributions to women's campaigns. In some US states, we have matching fund mechanisms if women can raise funds, or tax mechanisms for which would be a tax benefit for contributions to women's campaigns, or parties that guarantee internal distribution of contributions. So those could have tax benefits for these private contributions. Also, the use of resources. How we can make these resources visible in what they accomplish, what's called the visibilization of their external impacts. So I was talking about Brazil, guaranteed the presence of women's images were guaranteed in ads. So when the party is organizing virtual campaigns or ads in social network, they should guarantee spaces for messages by women or the women who are present to make them visible. The problem with virtual campaigns is regulatory jurisdiction. Any state can approve a law, but virtual campaigns and digitization of the campaign that goes beyond just the ads in the social network, but the use of mechanisms, for example, botnets, trolls, or comment farms. Those are abroad, so it is very difficult to control. But what it can do is to control is the expense allocated to that particular line item for a certain guarantee, but it's a field that is still not fully explored, especially because of virtual campaigns can be organized and managed and financed from abroad. And you are not that able to do anything about it. Thank you, Delia. Excellent recommendations, very concrete. And we are going to have to systematize these great ideas. Among them, how the devil is in the details. We are changing the election system. Yes, it's going to affect what you were building with quotas and parity. But if you're changing financing, which may be trivial, like we are going to give you public financing, but it's going to be reimbursed, not as an advance. That is a decision that is against women because, as Delia said, usually have more difficulties raising funds in the first place. So the regulatory aspects, we have to look closely at the fine print. A lot of details there. Remember the recent electoral reform in Panama. On the one hand, saying we are going to facilitate the participation of women in politics, but then you have a filter or a very fine print that is boycotting what the big lectures say. Essential element also, how to improve expenses and control of expenses. And the third topic that Delia had, which is digitization, virtualization, and the growing use of social networks. And as Delia said, we have regulations, you have electoral codes, and the concept of sovereignty can also be broken. So we need concrete aspects that have to be taken into account, which is growing in importance. Thank you, Delia. Now we go to Lisandra. You have the floor. Thank you. We all agree with parity being necessary. And the cultural aspects, it requires a transformation that is comprehensive in nature. Everything is comprehensive or integrated in nature. I would like to add possibly challenges or opportunities, this demographic bonus that we talk about in the region, that we have youth. The young are the biggest share of the population, but then we are relying on them, so they build what we want. So we are clearing the way for this fundamentalist onslaught, and it is essential to be able to reach this with our work, with our speech. So parity has to be rethought. We need to go to the organized women's, for example, neighborhood organizations. So we are thinking not only in political party candidate lists, but all spaces of representation. That is where we have to go. And that could also be interesting. And the challenges which would be financing. And we need grassroots of political parties have a gender perspective and the political willingness to strengthen their women leaders, who are the ones that are usually strengthening the political spaces of these parties, but they're not recognized or given the opportunity to participate on an equal footing. Also, laws to protect against violence, especially political violence against women, because we agree that the region is seeing advancing violence against women, preventing many from participating in these decision-making spaces. And as opportunities, at least we recognize in Paraguay that there's greater empowerment of women because we have more opportunities or spaces for training, reflection, and we are establishing foundations in the political parties to have more empowered women with greater knowledge. They're getting organized and they're working more in networks within the political parties. And from the group to promote parity, which is called the Women Beyond Parties and Colors, that join for a common cause objective, and women in grassroots and small territories. And we also see that as opportunities. We have greater spaces for training and education, and technology can also be considered an opportunity if we use it properly. And also taking into account the regulatory aspects. In other words, a bit of control on technology. And then more positive experiences in the region, countries with parity can give us an example how we can innovate, and we can look positively at those changes. And I think this also represents opportunities for the region. And that's what I wanted to present. I don't know if I had anything for this presentation. Great, Lissandra. And I want to basically highlight that your youth, you're a political leader, 25 years old, and going strong. And so focus not only on women, but also on the new generations of women, which are going with a lot of drive. And to congratulate you for this drive. From your presentation, we are gaining in insight on cultural shifts and the demographic bonus, which is running out. Latin America is not going to see it for much longer. So we have to make the best use of it in the window of opportunity. So we can see this closing soon. Also look at the importance of financing, as you've said. 3, how to put pressure on political parties. So recognize women's leadership. 4, regarding the offensive against political violence affecting women, which has affected women, we have to give a lot more importance. We have to see this. Have approved a law. After that, we have to monitor the law. What is really going to be the classification of violence, political violence, deviling in the details again. The other topic that you said, technology not only as a risk, but also as an opportunity. And we have a big risk if women are not duly supported and helped to become empowered. But if we empower them, that could become a very important tool to empower women, especially women with the leadership of youth, and how to be using and learning from best practices. And one of these virtues is here. And innovation. Thank you again for your leadership. And Alejandra, your final minutes. Thank you, Daniel. One of the favorite myths in Colombia is that women are potential mothers. And Dr. Mendez has been emphatic and in leading a program that's called Getting Bus. And this project has been supported by different NGOs. It's been focused on changing this myth. Women are not exclusively future mothers. They have a lot to give. And also in policy and politics, we cannot conceive electoral history only based on just one of the sexes of the genders. We need interdisciplinary, intercultural, political construction that goes beyond borders and adapts to this new changing reality. And here we have a new goals. And one of them would be digital empowering of women. And right now we are building a guide to maximize interoperability at the transnational level. And from her presidency, she has been reconstructing this so interoperability can be used by electoral instances to make women candidates visible, and then to insert young women or women who want to be part of these new transformation scenarios to be included. And we are focusing on decreasing false videos, cyberbullying, cyber harassment, to try to generate a new scenario to neutralize fake news, among others. So our magistrate, who's a leading woman in Colombia and the world, and who has believed in this new scene of parity and parity democracy. She believes it is so important to visibilize, make women visible with institutionality and women in political parties. So in your question, and our magistrate who's at the hospital right now and was not able to be with us, she is trying to focus her effort not only this pedagogical construction, but also on the effects of post-pandemic and try to make visible and insert women in all political scenarios. Thank you, Alejandra. And picking especially this central cultural issue, which is at the heart of this reflection. Women are not just future mothers. I mean, it should be their choice to start with this cultural mandate. And first you are a mother and then you can be something else, is something that we have to change. And the other thing would be empowering women in general in the digital aspect. We are in a new world where digital is here to stay and it's accelerating. So it is a new field because part of this challenge is in this new terrain. I have enjoyed this a lot. We have 229 people with us and they have enjoyed it as well. It has been a great conversation from macro to micro, from more conceptual reflection to specific aspects. So I would like to close with 5 items. 1, the awareness of the dignity of women is something that we cannot go back on. As Jimena said, we have to start from it. Secondly, as I said yesterday, the demand of inclusive parity democracy is also here to stay. It is an idea whose time has come, and there is nothing more powerful than that. And that time is now. So we have to unite the first, that dignity of women is no return, and that demand of a parity democracy is also here to stay. And we have to use instruments. All mechanisms, regulations, political willingness, and making any cultural changes that are needed will have to be carried out to go from discourse to action. The moment of change is here. We have to continue, not allow subterfuge or try to weasel our way out of it. Let's use the 2021-2024 super election cycle and the next one as a window of opportunity to make this decade the decade where Latin America goes from quotas to actual effective parity in the virtuous triangle of changes in culture, politics, and regulations. Thank you so much. I now go back to you, Pilar, thanking our 4 presenters, Tele Jimenez, Alexandra, and Alejandra, for their great interventions and very on point recommendations, which should be systematized, because here we have a roadmap and a work plan with a lot of detail. So Pilar, you have the floor back. Thank you, Danielle, for moderating this. Thank you very much to the panelists. It has been great. We've been able to see different aspects. And the previous panel and this panel have been spaces for deep reflection and helping us see a roadmap on how we can make progress in different lines and different aspects. We really thank the participants and as well as our moderator. We're almost finishing the second panel and the seminar. But before that, we are going to do a summary of what we have done in this morning. And we are going to give the floor to Isabel Torres, specialist in political participation, political rights of women. Isabel, you have the floor. Thank you. It is challenging to recapitulate such enriching discussion, but I'm going to call attention to 3 items. First, strengthening of inclusive democracy requires changes, social, cultural, political, and equality and non-discrimination and principles, values, and codes of conduct, both in the social and political spheres, and changes in politics, and no backtracking in human and political rights. The second item is that parity is not just a representation of electoral processes. Inclusive and inclusive participation would be full participation of citizens in all processes for decision making and incorporation of the needs and interests of women, taking into account their diversity. And the other aspect to be highlighted is that we need clear rules and even sanctions, and to have this extensive and not only everything that is with electoral process, but that the possibility of women to have access to political financing and transparency with all resources related to political campaigns.
And the access to financing, taking into consideration that one of the great difficulties is to do the representation is the economic autonomy of the women and the possibility of obtaining resources for political purposes. And in this environment, it is necessary to denaturalize the violence against women in the political and natural life, and to have more concrete mechanisms for the prevention, attention, and eradication of the violence. A democracy is not complete if we don't have women, but it is not complete either if we persist on having inequities, discriminations, and violence against women that reduce or limit their political rights. And finally, to point out that when we talk about democratization, it is not the democratization in the public environment. It's just it's a democratization that has to come to the private environment, and this implies a new social agreement, a new responsibility that is both individual and collective, to modify the inequity in the roles of gender, and that we should recognize the equalness and diversity and difference. So with that, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Isabel. It is really a challenge to try to make a summary, but I think that we have been very precise. Having said that, we thank all the people that have helped us throughout the 2 panels of this morning. Following us through the social networks. And to finish, we're going to have the use of the floor to Maria Noel Baeza, the Regional Director for UN Women for Latin America and the Caribbean, who is going to give us the closing words to finish with this seminar. You have the use of the floor now, Maria Noel. Thank you, Pilar, Amel, and all the participants of this panel that has been wonderful. Once again, I would like to thank you all. To Felipe Lopez Alba, the Regional Director of the UNDP, Manuel Suato, the President of IDEA, and all the people from Atenea, Pilar, Julia, all the teams of communications that are constantly informing about what is happening in Atenea. And thanks to all the people that have accompanied us throughout these 4 very important panels, and that are so enriching and so good throughout these 2 days, to be able to really take the actions that we need to take in all of our countries so that we can strengthen, integrally strengthen the democracies, to have a parity democracy. And I would like to finalize very quickly by making a summon to action, because we cannot postpone it anymore. We have several countries that are discussing it in their parliaments, and we believe that the time of parity is now, and that parity of entrance and of exit also, as I was saying. And this consistency of non-return, that is something that was also spoken in the panel as we saw before. The things that we have advanced on, it might disappear with a simple, in a minute. And that is why it is so important to have that awareness of looking at the challenges very structured, very institutionalized in the system. And I would like to reaffirm the stewardship commitment that we have had every year, where we have proposed to carry out the measures and mechanisms that make it possible in all the environments, in all the levels of government, in all the powers of the state, to include women in all their diversity with intersectorial focus. It is necessary to promote the adoption of legal frameworks that prevent, do the monitoring, sanction, and that eradicate the violence against women in the political environment. And as much as the women take that space of power to do what we have to do so that we can achieve that political participation, the more violence there's going to be. So we have to be ready to prevent it. We have to be ready to have electoral justice, to have the due process, and we also have to be very aware that we have to eradicate that violence, both in the means and in the social network. We have seen it in several places, unfortunately. We have to continue on strengthening the environment for the participation of women in the public sphere and all the decision making. To continue on focusing on public policies, integral public policies, because as you know, that is a topic that we are promoting and adopting the realities that appear, and to inspect them and fiscalize them, as Daddy was saying. That is very important to know what we are spending the money on that is aimed for women. And finally, to continue on with that stabilization, because the parity democracy is not just at the electoral level, it's in every environment of the state, in all the public policies. And of course, in the responses to the pandemic. I think that this leads us to continue on making an exchange of networks and policies, politics, and such important things that have enabled us. We need to strengthen the democracies, because that means also to promote the real participation, to strengthen that democracy, that parity democracy, simply because we have to do it. We cannot continue on delaying it anymore. So I invite all of you to continue on in these conversations and to continue on summoning our efforts for a future with a parity that is inclusive and sustainable without leaving anybody behind. Thank you very much, and good morning. Thank you very much, Manuel. Virtual round of applause for you, for the moderators, and for the 8 panel members that have accompanied us today. We really thank them. We remind you that at the end of the seminar, we will have the recording of these 2 days reach you, but you can also access them in the Atenea's webpage, which is www.atenea.es/paridad. So we invite you to check this seminar and the materials that we have on there from IDEA International and from UNDP Women women, we are very pleased to have your participation, and we thank you for that. And to finish, we ask you to turn your cameras on so that we can take a group photograph at the end of the second day. So please, if all of you want to turn on your cameras, please do so. If the interpreters can also turn their cameras on, we would appreciate that. As we have said it, we have this seminar in English, Portuguese, and Spanish, and in sign language. For the 4 languages, they are accessible on the web, and they will be transmitted also via email. We smile, and there goes a photograph. Perfect, thank you. Thanks to all of you once again, and until the next opportunity. Bye-bye.